2 years. I'm 2 years older than he is.
How, when the first time that you went to live with your sister Karen, how old were you?
Probably about maybe 3 or 4. I remember being very small. My mom was living in Arizona, and I remember going to stay with her.
And later you went back and spent more time with her.
Yes, sir.
What was the relationship that you had with your sister Karen?
She and I have always been very, very close. She and my mother were not so close, and so my mom, tried to kind of prohibit me from seeing her a lot during my life growing up, which actually probably made us closer, just the defiance.
Did your sister Karen assume some of the parenting responsibilities for you?
Definitely. She definitely treated me just like her kids. She has two daughters that are also in the same age range as I am, that I'm very close with also whenever I was growing up. And she just treated me just like I got grounded and spankings and everything just like the rest of them.
She treated you just like she treated one of her own children. Is
Yes.
that correct? After approximately 16 or 17 years old of age, tell us what happened then.
Well, whenever I was right before I turned 16, my mom and my stepdad split up, and my mom went back to New Mexico, and at that time I went back to be with her. Um, I guess I was just rebelling. I had met a man, his name is Scott Elmer, and he and I started dating, and I wanted to get married, and my mom put some stipulations on it that, I would finish school and not have any kids until after I got out of school. And I agreed to all of them, but then I didn't follow through with any of them. So we ended up having a little girl, and her name is Shay. And
When was Shay born?
she was born in 1989. I was 17.
And tell us about your relationship with Scott Elmer.
We were married for 2 years, and we divorced whenever she was about 10 months old. And basically, we were just too young. We didn't really know what marriage was even supposed to be about. And so, just I knew that I wanted to go to school. He was very jealous. He really didn't want me to work or go to school or even to go to the grocery store. Was
And at some point, did you and Scott divorce?
Yes, sir, we did. It was right. I had just turned 18.
And what happened with your daughter Shay after you divorced?
She went with me, and Scott and I, we tried to reconciliate a couple of different times, and finally it just wasn't working, and he went on and he ended up marrying someone else. And I wanted to move to Texas, and he did not. I was living in New Mexico at that time, and he didn't want me to go. And so we had a kind of a custody dispute for a little while because I was wanting to move and he didn't want me to. And so that's kind of what happened.
And tell us what happened after you were divorced and you decided to move.
Well, finally, we came to some agreements, and I did move to Texas. And again, I went with my sister, Karen. At this time, Shay was approximately, actually, I went to Wichita Falls, and then I came back, and that's whenever Scott and I were really trying to get back together, and we didn't. And the attorney that had done my divorce, he had been diagnosed with cancer, and so he was retiring. And I was having something I had to get done that weekend, and so the secretary had scheduled an appointment with the other attorney that was in his office, and his name was Ron Adamson. And I was his last client of the day. And when I went to go see him, he had asked me if I could give him a ride to go pick up his car. Anyway, we started talking, and one thing led to another. We ended up started dating, and was helping me with the custody situation, and we ended up getting married for about 8 months. He had, after just a little while, he decided that, primarily he was just trying to help me, and that's not what he really wanted to do. But we ended up staying together for about 4 years, even though we weren't married anymore.
Now, during that period of time, where were you living then?
In New Mexico still.
Were you working then?
I was going to school.
What kind of school were you going?
I was finishing high school, and it was just, I had taken a couple of just basic classes at the junior college.
And after you and Ron Adamson split up, what did you do?
We ended up splitting up when I was right before I turned 22. He had a baby with someone else, and ultimately that was the end of our relationship. And so I moved back to Texas. My sister Karen had, at that point, her husband had been transferred, or actually she and her husband had been transferred to Lubbock, the Lubbock area, West Texas. And so I stayed with her for about 2 or 3 months until I got on my feet. And I had made friends with someone that I worked with, and she and I got a place together, and we were roommates for about 6 months to 8 months. And then I was able to finally get a place on my own, just Shay and I. And at that point, I started doing children's theater, and I was going to school and working.
Tell us about the children's theater.
I had really wanted to act, but I didn't have any experience, and I had met this guy who was a director, and he had kind of given me a couple of just lessons, like teaching me about stage direction and stuff. And he let me sit in on a production just to kind of get familiar with terminology and stuff. And he wrote some original productions, but primarily they were productions geared toward children. We did Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty, and we would just travel in that little area, Lubbock, Post, Texas. I really don't remember the other little towns, but
What age children were you working with?
little kids, from all different ages, really.
Yeah, how long did you do that?
I did that for a couple of years, I guess, and I was really getting burnt out because I lived in Lubbock, Texas, and I was going to school in Levelland, Texas, which was about an hour in one direction, and then I was doing theater in Post, Texas, which was an hour another direction. So I was really, I put 50,000 miles on my car in 1 year.
And what did you do after you stopped doing the children's theater?
Actually, I quit school first because I really loved doing the theater. And about that time, I was about 24 at this time, and I had met another gentleman. His name was Nicky Smith, and we dated for approximately a year, and then we got married.
Tell us about Nicky.
Nicky was from West Texas. He was from a really small town called Olton, Texas, but he lived in a town called Plainview, Texas, which is in between Lubbock and Amarillo, Texas. He was in the agriculture industry. He was a mechanized irrigation dealership. He specialized in water. He would travel to other countries and teach them how to irrigate and grow water cotton. He'd gone to Europe, to Brazil, and he'd gone to Egypt. And whenever we got married, we had bought a house in the Austin area, and so we moved to by the lake.
Now, was Nicky was that a family business?
He came from a farming family. His father, grandfather, and brother were all farmers. They were cotton farmers, but he didn't farm. He was more in the business side of it. He did own a farm. He had 4 sections, but he was like the landlord. He had tenants that actually farmed it.
Was Kenny a successful businessman?
Yes, sir, he was. At one point, he had 5 dealerships. He had sold 3 of them. He only had 2. He was also involved in some other businesses. He had a business where they did embroidery on like jackets and t-shirts and hats that he had partnered with a lady. He also was bonded, and they did road signs for the state. He had with another guy, they were working on this project. I don't really know that much about the sprinkler systems, but it was some kind of device that went on the sprinklers to help keep the sand out, to keep them from messing up. So he was also involved in that, and just a few other little things.
And during the time that you were married to Nikki, were you working?
No, sir. I just traveled with him and did a little theater here and there.
Did something bad happen to Nikki?
He did, yes. On Memorial Day 2000, we had gone to a friend's house, and we lived on the lake, and they had lowered the lake so that they could work on the dams. And I guess, I don't know, he dove off in the lake, and he broke his neck. And he was paralyzed from the shoulders down, and he was in the hospital for about 6 months before he passed away.
Where was he in the hospital?
Originally, he was in Austin. They flew him to Austin, and he was there for approximately a week, and they did his surgery. And his family, his parents came, and his kids, he had 2 kids. His family was friends with the chief of a surgeon in Lubbock, Texas, and there was an experimental spinal cord medicine, and we took him to Lubbock so that he could get that.
What arrangements did you go to be in Lubbock with him?
At that time, my niece was living in Lubbock. At first, whenever he first went, he was in ICU. He ended up getting pneumonia immediately, and he was in ICU for about 2 weeks. And so I primarily was able to like take a shower and stuff at my niece Candace's house. But I was at the hospital pretty much 24 hours a day. After about 2 weeks, I had spoke to the doctor, and I had asked him if we hired a 24-hour nurse, if they could please move him into a room so that I could stay with him, and he agreed to that. So from that moment on, I slept at the hospital, ate at the hospital, showered at the hospital, everything. Approximately 3 months or so into it, I had to go to Austin to check on our house. We were in the middle of remodeling it whenever his accident happened, and the seasons were changing, so I needed to get different clothes. So the private nurse that I had hired, she stayed with him for 24 hours, and I left that day, went to Austin, stayed one night, and came right back the next day.
Did you continue to stay with him at the hospital?
Yes, sir, I did. And then after about 4 months, we moved him to San Antonio to a rehab. And at that time, it was really bad. He was on a ventilator. It was really bad, and he wasn't getting very good care. And so I wanted to move him to another rehab. And so I had called Lana, who was the private nurse, to come and stay with him again. And I left that day and went to Dallas. I drove to Dallas to check out the rehab there because I wasn't going to send him again without checking it out first. And I went to Baylor, and I met with the doctor, and we made arrangements, and we flew him there. I was again just gone one day, and I was right back in San Antonio with him.
Did you move him to the new rehab center?
Yes, sir, we did.
Would you tell us about that?
Once we got to the rehab, they had done more tests on him, and his diaphragm was completely paralyzed. And so they said he would never come off the ventilator. The doctor said that the only thing he really had going for him is that really nothing. They said that eventually he would get something called lock-in, where his spinal cord was dying and it was going up to his brainstem, and they said that eventually he would just be able to blink his eyes. And so at that time he chose that he wanted to turn his ventilator off. He didn't want to live like that.
And what happened after that?
After we spoke to his doctor, I made arrangements because he wanted to go home. I made arrangements with a doctor friend of mine and private health care, and I had him transferred. I flew him back to our house. And the private nurse, Lana, she came, and I believe we got there in the middle of the week. He got to say goodbye to all his friends and give all of his stuff away. And then by the weekend, he just got really, really bad. And by the first of the next week, he passed away.
Did he make the choice to disconnect the ventilator himself?
Yes, sir, he did.
And after he passed away, what did you do?
Well, I went back to Olton, where his primary business was, and I stayed with his brother and his wife for a couple of months to try to take care of some business. The kids and I, his two children and myself, we inherited everything. He split everything down the middle. There was a lot of animosity in his family in regards to his business. It wasn't something that I grew up in. I didn't know anything about that business, and it wasn't something that I really wanted to be involved in. So I made arrangements with his brother to buy my half of the business out. I made some trades with the kids so that we could kind of go our own ways, because I think they kind of resented me after he passed away because I was able to go on with my life and they were still stuck there. And so I wanted to just kind of separate a little. I traded my half of his retirement account for the kids' half of the farm. I sold my half of the business to his brother, and I went back to Austin to the house. At that time, I had decided that I wanted to go to New York to do an acting workshop over the summer. And it was a 4-week workshop. And during that time, I realized how bad I really was. And so I had a friend in San Antonio who was an attorney, and he really encouraged me to do what made me happy, and that if I wanted to go to New York to study, then I should do that. He was really the only person who supported me, even out of my own family. They didn't want me to go. And so I went back to Texas, and Shay and I, we had gone to dinner, and we weren't really for sure if we wanted to go to New York or LA. I knew that I wanted to do acting, but I wasn't 100% sure. And she and I, we flipped a quarter one night at dinner to see which way we'd go. So that's how we ended up in New York. And we moved to New York about 2 weeks before September 11th.
Now, had you inherited a substantial amount of money from Nikki?
Relatively, yes, sir.
And were you able to use the money that you inherited to move to New York?
Yes, sir. It allowed me to be able to go to school full-time. When I was in New York, I had auditioned for a 2-year conservatory, and I was accepted into it. And so I put Shay in a Catholic school, and I went to the conservatory, and I did that full-time.
Tell me about that.
It was a 2-year program. It was geared more toward film and television versus theater. My experience up to that point had primarily been theater. And basically, I went to school. We were told not to audition or even try to work in any shape, form, or fashion, that we really needed to focus on that. So I did the 2-year conservatory. During the second year, a few things had happened. Shay had really gotten behind in school, and she had begged me one night when I came home to please let her go stay with my sister Karen. Shay was very close to, because my sister had two more kids after the older ones, and so her two younger boys are the same age as Shay. So Shay asked me if she could please go stay, so I let Shay go stay with my sister Karen during my second year of the conservatory.
And what happened after that?
Well, during the very end of my second year, my mom, I had moved her to Texas to stay in my house. I still owned my house that Nikki and I had, and I had moved her there to try to help her out and also to help me put somebody in my house so it wasn't vacant. And my mom had fallen and broke her leg. And while she was in the hospital, she fell and broke her hip, which with all those, a complication was that she had a blood clot go to her lungs. And so they had to do some more tests on her, and one of those was an MRI. And when they injected the dye, it ruptured in her arm, and she almost lost her right arm. So now she has a broken leg, a broken hip, and her right arm she's just about lost. So I get my middle sister, I fly down and I get her and bring her to Austin to stay with her and help my mom while I try to finish school and stuff. My mom starts recovering and doing better, and Shay is still gone, and so I feel like at this time I should go to LA because I feel like that's more of where the type of the industry I want to be in. New York was more for theater, and LA was more for film and television stuff. And so I, at that time, I had an estate sale, and I kind of liquidated everything, and I just felt so spread out. So I really kind of collected everything. And when I went to LA, I moved my mom to a little house, and I put my house on the market, and I went to LA.
And what year are we up to now?
I was about 32, 33, so about 9 or 10 years ago.
Okay, so when you get to LA, what happens out there?
It was awful. I hated it. It was just, I hated the industry. I didn't like the people. Just, it was so fake and phony, and it just really turned me off of acting. The industry is really geared toward, age, and they were wanting me to lie about my age and how old I was. And I have a daughter who, I mean, she's, I definitely am not old enough to say that, she's younger. So it was just a lot of things. I was offered a modeling job, and the producer pretty much told me that I was going to have to, or the producer's assistant told me that I had the job as long as I would sleep with the producer, and that was really the last straw for me. I stopped. I didn't want to be involved in the industry anymore. And so at that time, I decided to go stay with my mom and help her. My middle sister had kind of had enough of my mom, and so I went to Texas. During that time while I was in Texas, I got my real estate license. But I had kind of outgrown Texas. I was not feeling it at all. I was very unhappy there. And my mom kept talking about going back to New Mexico. That's really where her friends and stuff were at. And so I had a financial advisor that I had worked with in New York for several years, and he kept telling me that if I wanted to come back to New York, I really had to sell everything at this point, that if I didn't want to be in Texas, it didn't make sense to have stuff in Texas anymore. And so at this point, my oldest sister, Karen, I don't know if you could say she volunteered or got suckered into it or whatever, but my mom ended up going with her for about 6 months. And at that time, I sold my house and the farm that I had, the cotton farm, and I pretty much liquidated everything, and I went back to New York. And after about 6 months, we moved my mom back to New Mexico. So each one of us had her for about 6 months.
When you got back to New York, what did you do?
Well, I was kind of confused because my whole life I had wanted to do acting, and I had just come to a point where, my priorities had really changed. I felt like the sacrifices were not worth it, and it wasn't what I wanted to do anymore. And so I had about a year of trying to just kind of find out what I wanted to do. When Nikki and I were together before he got hurt, I had been going to cosmetology school, and I was unable to finish that in Texas. So I finished that in New York, and I started managing a hair salon, day spa, in the Upper East Side in Manhattan. And I did that for about a year or so, I guess. And I also became involved in this program called Momentum. I don't know if you're familiar, but there's another company called Landmark. It has to do with just self-development and, just participating in the community and stuff. And I started dating a guy. His name was Nick. And we dated for about 8 months. And when he and I broke up, I kind of left Momentum. I pulled away from it.
Now, during the time that you were back in New York, did you have some bit parts in various movies?
Whenever I was actually, right at the time I was graduating the conservatory, that's whenever I did the Stepford Wives. I just had like a few weeks left, and I had submitted my own headshot and resume, and I was selected to do extra work. I was featured a couple times, but I worked on it for 4.5 months, but so much of it is cut. So I was kind of disappointed when I actually saw the movie.
Did you have a speaking role in the movie?
No, sir.
What was your role?
I was just an extra. I was a wife. They were looking for tall blondes.
In the movie, you see a lot of tall, blonde females?
Yes, sir. Just about every one of them are tall blondes.
And you were one of those tall blondes?
Yes, sir.
Standing in the background?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever have any speaking role in any kind of film?
No, sir. I did a little bit of extra work. I did an episode of The Sopranos. When I was in LA, I did an episode of The OC, but it was all extra work primarily. My acting experience really has been theater, and I did a few independent films or student films, but again, they're all just small parts.
Tell us what happened as time went by while you were still in New York.
When I was working at the salon, I was really wanting to quit. I felt like it was kind of a waste of my time. I didn't like just sitting there not doing, I felt like I had more to offer than that. But my boss at the time, he really was not wanting me to quit. And so I had talked him into giving me 2 vacations a year as part of for me to stay there. And in January of 2007, I went to St. John, U.S. Virgin Islands for a vacation. I went for a week. And whenever I got there, I just fell in love with it. It was U.S. territory, English speaking. They had U.S. money. I didn't really have any reason to stay. At that time, Shay had gone to live with her dad in New Mexico. And so I went back. I ended up staying in St. John for 6 weeks. And I went back to New York, and I sold my car and sublet my apartment and put stuff in storage, and I shipped a small shipment of stuff to St. John. And at the end of that week, I had received a telephone call from Shay and her stepmom. And at that time, Shay was going through some stuff, and she wanted to quit school. And so I flew to New Mexico and told her that that was not an option for her. And I told her that I'd stay there until the year was up. And after about a week, she asked me if she could please go with me to St. John. And so she and I negotiated that she would finish school and not give me any trouble over it. And so I agreed to take her. And so I took her to St. John, and she finished her junior year of school. And when I went to St. John, it was right during tourist season, so there's really no jobs or anything. And so I started volunteering at a art gallery. I had been painting for several years, just kind of as a hobby anyway. I'd started doing it whenever I first moved to New York. And so I was really kind of thrown into the art world. I had gotten a job bartending, and whenever they hired me, they said really they could only use me like 1 day a week. But then during off season, I ended up bartending a lot, and working at the or the art gallery. And one of the problems was there wasn't really any place to purchase art supplies. And so I came up with the idea to actually put an art supply store in the art gallery. And so I continued to do that.
Uh, How long did you do that?
I would say that I was there maybe 6 or 8 months before I started it. We had a little spot and we had to remodel it, which took a couple months. From the time I opened the doors to the time I closed the door, it was a little over 2 years.
Now, when you were in St. John's, did you still have a substantial amount of the savings that you had inherited from there?
Yes, sir. I had a financial advisor that I had spoke of earlier. I had a money market account, and it was invested, and I pretty much was able to just get the interest of an allowance every month. I did get into it a few times, to start the art supply store, and, you know,
Did there come a time when you were living in St. John's when you met Grant Hayes?
yes, sir.
Would you tell us about that?
Well, the first time I met him, I saw him performing. I was actually on a date with someone else, and I had saw him perform, and I thought he was really talented. And he and I just had a very brief conversation, and he had given me one of his CDs. And I was working at the Beach Bar, and I kept telling everybody, there's this new guy on Island, and how talented he was, that they should go check him out. And at that time, there was this new girl on Island. Her name was Kristen, and I had said something to Grant, or to her about Grant, and she just said, yeah, she knows him. And I said something to the effect of something about his wife, and she's like, he's not married. And I was like, I don't know, that's just, and then I didn't see Grant again for about 6 months, and then I ran into him again. And I was out, Shay and I, we had just gotten back from New York. It was in approximately October of 2009, I believe. Shay was wanting to go to the Fashion Institute in New York City. And I was really kind of debating. I didn't really want to leave St. John because I really loved it there, but she didn't want to go by herself. And so we went to New York to check out the school, and we checked out, different neighborhoods and stuff. And, I was debating, is she mature enough to let her live in New York by herself? I didn't really know for sure. And so we spent a week there, and at the end of that week, I decided, I told her I would just liquidate the store and come back to New York with her.
Had you become romantically involved with Grant Hayes while you were in the Virgin Islands?
Yes, sir. After knowing him for about a month, the second time I met him, like I said, the first time I met him one time, and I didn't see him again for months and months. We just had totally different lives and schedules. We never, whenever I ran into him that night at the Beach Bar, we started talking, and I was telling him that I liked his music and I thought he was really talented, and I had mentioned his guitar because he played a really unique guitar. It's a traveling guitar. It's very small. And anyway, I told him that I had tried to teach myself how to play guitar, and he told me he could give me guitar lessons. And so we exchanged telephone numbers, and from that moment on, I kept running into him everywhere. All over the place. And about a week later, we ended up meeting for a guitar lesson. He came to my apartment, and we hung out all day, and he really did teach me a lot of stuff about guitar. He taught me a lot of chords and notes and stuff. And then that afternoon, I lived in a they were building it. It was going to be a resort, but because they hadn't finished it yet, some of the people who actually owned condos in it were renting them to try to, make up until they were actually able to rent them for what they had purchased them for. And I was friends with the lady who was doing the property management, and so I was actually able to rent one for more long-term versus, short-term. And in that building, there were a lot of us that had become friends, and once a week we would all meet at my one friend, her name's Kim, we would all meet at her house, and we would take turns cooking, and that night it was my turn to cook. And so I invited Grant to go with us, and he ended up going, and we just ended up started hanging out, and we just became friends. And after about a month, he ended up kissing me one night, and I kicked him out, and I avoided him for about a week, and then we ended up, I wouldn't answer his calls or anything, and he was just kind of persistent, and then we ended up hanging out again, and we ended up starting to kind of see each other, and
How long after you became romantically involved with him did you and Shay decide to move back to New York?
I would say about a month is all. I would say that we probably started seeing each other kind of on the down low. I would say the end of November maybe, and Shay and I left the end of December to go to New York.
And what did you and Shay do once you got to New York?
Whenever we first got to New York, she and I stayed at a hotel for about a week. We met with brokers. We were trying to find an apartment. We wanted to live in Manhattan versus Brooklyn. We lived in Brooklyn before. I lived in New York for a total of about 6 years after, with the exception of the time that I went to LA.
At some point after you got to New York, did Grant come to New York too?
Yes, after we got to New York, Grant and I continued to talk on the telephone, and he had told me that my ex-boyfriend, his name was Mike, was really kind of stalking him. That was another reason that I agreed to leave St. John also, because whenever I broke up with him, he really didn't take it very well, and he was really kind of just harassing me. Every time I bartended, he would show up there. I also worked at a hair salon just a few mornings a week, and he would always show up and want to talk to me. And ultimately, he ended up contributing to me getting fired at the beach bar, and he was just really making it hard. And that was one reason that, I kind of kept my relationship with Grant kind of secret, because I just didn't want to cause any problems for him. And after I left, he told me Mike was really going crazy and really harassing him, and that at one point that Grant had been walking, and Mike had tried to run him off the road. And so he told me that he had gone to the cops, and the cops told him that it was probably time for him to leave the island. And so, he and I had talked. He had told me before I went to New York that at one point he was had an opportunity to go to New York, but he, for whatever reason, he didn't. And I had told him that New York was probably a good place for him because of his, his music career. In my opinion, he was very talented, and I really believed that he could have, a good career. He had told me that he had been doing this for a number of years, and that he had done a lot of touring, and that when he lived in North Carolina, he had actually made quite a name for himself in regards to the music industry. He told me that he had toured with Jack Johnson, and he told me that he had dated Norah Jones, and so he had told me some pretty impressive stuff, and
He painted a pretty impressive picture of himself, didn't he?
he did. He had also told me that he had worked at as a stockbroker, and that he had made over $1 million before. He also told me that he had sponsored several families. I can't remember where, but it had in association with a Bible study course, And so he had really told me a lot of stuff that
Now, what year are we up to now?
this is, Shay and I came back the December 31st of 2009, so 2009 and 10.
Now, when did Grant come to New York?
The middle of January, he kind of, I guess I felt really bad for him because I felt like he was in jeopardy because of my ex-boyfriend, and so I purchased him a plane ticket to come to New York.
And what happened then?
He came to New York, and Shay and I, we had gotten a 3-bedroom apartment in Manhattan, and so he stayed with us. And I really just was trying to help him get his career. I went with him every night, and, you know, I helped him. The industry was very new to me, so I was kind of trying to learn the industry and, you know, trying to help him find open mic nights, which is where, you know, the singers would go to try to perform, and hopefully somebody would show up that could offer them, you know, further
At some
bookings.
point during that time, did Shay also start helping Grant with book shows and so forth?
It was a little bit later than that. Whenever whenever Grant first came to North Carolina or to New York, he was still had, I'm not sure what kind of relationship he and Laura had. He had told me whenever we lived in St. John that because whenever he and I started, before we actually got romantically involved, he told me that their relationship was 100% over, that the only relationship he had with her had to do with their kids, that they had had 2 kids together. And he had told me a variety of different stories. He had told me about Kristen, the lady that I had met that night at the beach bar. That was actually his girlfriend, how he got to St. John. She was, had been coming to St. John for many years, and he had come to St. John with Kristen. At some point, Kristen and Grant broke up, and Laura came to St. John. I only saw Laura one time while she was ever in St. John. I never met her or anything, so I didn't, you know, I didn't really know. It was kind of confusing to me at first. And just over, you know, us getting to know each other, he just told me, you know, that their relationship was purely to do with the kids. That was it. And then whenever we got to New York, she was still helping him quite a bit with his career. She was booking, trying to help him find venues to play at. And, you know, I had actually questioned him at one time about it, like, you know, if it was just interesting to me that they had broke up, but she was still helping him. It just seemed like a very unusual circumstance. And at one point, Shay and Laura started kind of communicating because Shay got to where she would go with Grant and, you know, just help make sure people got flyers, or that they would get like their email address so they could put them on a mailing list and stuff like that. And so Laura and Shay kind of were building a relationship more so.
Was that a friendly relationship?
Yeah, it was business. So, I mean, I don't think they spoke other than just business stuff.
Did there come a time when Grant brought little Grant to New York?
Yes, sir. It was actually very short time after came to New York. He came to New York the middle of January. The middle of February, I was to start school at the Institute of Audio Research. Because being around him, I had really become interested in the music industry, and so I was going to take this 9-month course to do music engineering. And I had about 2 weeks before I was to start, and so he asked me if I would go with him to North Carolina to see the boys. I know that he talked to the boys every single day. He talked to Laura numerous times throughout the day, and he just seemed kind of depressed that, you know, he was really missing them. At one point in time, I had even encouraged him that maybe he should try to make things work with Laura if his kids were really that important with him. And he told me what they had was absolutely over, and he wasn't interested in that at all.
Now, did you and Grant, well, little Grant is up in New York with you?
He comes to New York. We go to North Carolina. Grant and I drive. I rent a car and we drive to North Carolina. I end up staying about a week. At that time, he goes with Laura. I drop him off with Laura for for that day. He just goes and spends the day with her and the kids. And that evening, I pick him up again, and I take him to a show. At this time, I'm the only person that has a driver's license. Everybody he knows, nobody has a driver's license. They've all lost their license. And so I kind of became the designated driver of everybody on that trip. And so I had taken him, and he had a show that night and played. And we had actually had a really good week. And whenever I had to leave to get back to New York, there was a snowstorm coming, and plus I was supposed to start school later that week. And so I left him in Raleigh. Gentle had been sick. Apparently that was a reason that she had left the Virgin Islands, because when Gentle was born, he had a birth defect, which I didn't find this out until much later. I was led to believe that he was sick due to the environment of St. John. And Grant wanted to stay and go to the doctor with Laura while she took Gentle.
Did Grant come back to New York?
He did. He called me and he asked me if it would be all right if he brought little Grant for 2 weeks. And I told him yes, of course. And so he ended up coming back to New York, and he had little Grant. And whenever I first met little Grant, he just seemed kind of scared. He was like really kind of timid, and he didn't really talk. He threw lots of temper tantrums, and he was just really cute. And it just seemed...
Problem developed between Grant and Laura about little Grant being in New York.
At some point it did. I really don't know exactly all the details. I know that little Grant came, they got there in the middle of the week. And like I said, whenever he first came, it was for 2 weeks. But something by the end of that week, the first part of the following week, I don't really know what happened. Grant told me that Laura asked him to just keep little Grant, that with Gentle being sick and stuff, it was just too hard on her and she needed help. And she asked if he would just keep him for a while. And so I told Grant that I was okay with that. I was going to take just a 2-week leave of absence at school, and once this arose, I just went ahead and withdrew. I mean, I didn't have a whole lot invested in it at that point, so.
At some point in this process, are there some legal proceedings that are instituted?
It was a little, probably like the middle part of March. And again, I really don't know all the details. I really tried to stay out of it. I really did try to encourage Grant to be civil because there were 2 kids involved. And just from my own experience, with Shay's dad, whenever she was little, I mean, I really was just trying to look out for the kids and make sure that everybody could get along. And I told Grant that it's best for the kids if they were able to communicate. And so at some point in the middle of March, he received papers from Laura, and I don't know if it had to do with child support or custody or both. I'm not 100% sure. But she had filed something on him, and at this point, he wanted to fight it. Before this had happened, he had met this guy in New York who had a brother who was in Shanghai, China, who was a musician, and they were trying to get Grant to come to Shanghai to play at the House of Blues for 3 months. They, they had both met Grant and seen him play and stuff, and they just felt like it would be a good boost for his career. And so we had talked about it, and but we had actually talked about it No, it was after little Grant came. And I guess he had talked to Laura about it, and I don't really know. I don't really know what happened, but I think that was kind of the instigation of her wanting little Grant to come back. She was afraid that he was going to take Grant to China. And so he was going to let her come and get little Grant. But then he received these papers in the mail, and I don't really know exactly, but she had told him just to throw the papers away, that she was sorry she did it. And whenever he opened the papers, it was dated, there was a court date for whenever we were actually supposed to be gone to China. And so he just felt like she was being deceptive, trying to pull one over on him. And so at that point, he wanted to cancel her plane ticket because I had purchased a plane ticket for her to come get little Grant back. I had actually even called her on Easter and just told her thank you so much for letting Grant come, and what a sweet little boy he was. And and I just reassured her that nobody was trying to replace her, and that she told me that she looked forward to meeting me and getting to know me and stuff, and I told her the same. And that's kind of how she and I ended. And then whenever that whole situation with the plane ticket, whenever he canceled that, it just started kind of escalating from there. He called an attorney here in North Carolina, in Greenville or Greenboro, I can't remember, I get them mixed up. Greenville, I think. Greensville. And his name was William Hill. And up at this point, Grant had just told me different things along the way, and I honestly was kind of feeling sorry for Laura because it didn't appear to me that she really had any kind of support system. She wasn't close to her family from and again, everything I know is just what I learned through Grant. And so I kind of was feeling sorry for her a little bit. And whenever Grant had told me that he had caught Laura, one night he had come and he had woke me up, or it was early in the morning, he had woke me up, and he told me that he had been on the computer all night, and that he had Laura's passwords and stuff, and that he had caught her on this website called Sugar Daddies. And he said that she had it linked to his checking account in Kinston, and that it freaked him out, and so he called the FBI. And he told me that the FBI told him that they already knew about it and that they were watching the situation. And so at that time, so that was a real big concern of his, just what her activities were on this website, what she was actually doing. Again, I didn't see anything. I don't know anything. All I know is what I learned from him. At that time, he called Mr. Hill, and after a long consultation with him on the phone, after he got off, he had told me that Mr. Hill had told him that Grant and I living together were just as bad as her soliciting on the internet. And so Grant said we needed to get married, and so I agreed. And so that was in March, and so Grant started planning this really elaborate wedding, and I was like, can't we just get married? Does it have to be something crazy? And so we ended up going to Las Vegas, and it was Grant and myself and Shay and little Grant, and then Grant has a friend, Paul Hutchins, that met us in Las Vegas. And we got there on a Saturday, we got married on Monday, and we came back on Wednesday.
What happened after that?
After we got back to New York, Grant wanted to come to Raleigh. Grant's birthday was April 30th, and little Grant's birthday was May 2nd. And he wanted to come back and bring little Grant so that Laura could see him for his birthday. And honestly, I think he just wanted to kind of maybe show off a little. He booked several tables at a venue here in Raleigh called Oliver Twist, and he had invited some people. It was just a really awkward, I felt pretty uncomfortable, honestly. I felt like he was just trying to show off. during this time, whenever my experience with Grant, whenever I would go out with him, was very different than whenever we were alone. He was definitely a different person whenever we would go out versus it just being in the home environment.
Explain that, if you will.
He was just really flamboyant, and he just wanted to appear to be more than he really was. I don't know, that's pretty accurate.
Did there come a time when you agreed to move back to Raleigh with Grant?
Whenever we got back to Raleigh, we just stayed for a few days, maybe 4 or 5 days, and we had a small little birthday party, and we did invite Laura and Grant's parents, and it was very civil. You know, Laura came, and she was really impressed with little Grant, how much he had, you know, learned to talk and stuff, and they got to spend the whole afternoon and day together. And I got to meet Gentle for the first time, and I held Gentle, and, you know, I think that, I don't think I realized at the time, but I think that she was very shocked that Grant and I had gotten married. She had told me congratulations and stuff that day, but I think it really came as a shock to her. Later, I have since found out that he was definitely telling her one story and me another. So.
What do you mean?
Well, he was telling me that they had no relationship other than the kids, and he was telling her that I was a business investor, which was never, ever, ever the case at all. You know, yes, I was trying to help him because I believed in him and his talent, but it wasn't a financial, you know, investment by any shape. Well, at least it wasn't at that point anyway.
It wasn't for you, was it?
No, not at all.
When you came back to Raleigh, is that when you rented the apartment at Bella Park Trail?
Yes, sir. Whenever we got back to New York after our second visit to Raleigh, whenever it was little Grant's birthday, whenever we got back to New York, again, Grant just he just seemed depressed all the time, like he was never happy anywhere. He didn't like St. John, he didn't like New York, he didn't like North Carolina. And he kind of was indicating that it was really because he was just missing his kids so much, and he was really concerned about Gentle. At this point, we had learned that Gentle needed to have a surgery, and he was saying Laura didn't want Gentle to have the surgery because he was so little, but when Grant tried to contact the doctor really wouldn't talk to him, and he ended up having to have the attorney send him a letter stating that he was the father for him to talk to him. I didn't learn until we actually got Gentle in our possession that what was really wrong with him was just a minor birth defect. It wasn't at all what I was led to believe it was. Anyway, at that time, this would be the first part of May, middle of May, he asked me if I would please come to North Carolina with him for 3 months so that he could get Gentle and make sure he was taken care of. And honestly, I did not want to come to North Carolina at all. But I felt obligated at that point because I had married him, and, you know, I took that commitment very seriously. Shay and her best friend had already made arrangements for her best friend Allie to come stay with her while we were going to go to China. So I told Shay to for her and Allie to go ahead and continue with their plans, and because I didn't want to leave Shay in New York by herself, but I didn't want to, make her go to North Carolina either. At this point in time, Shay was denied entrance into the Fashion Institute, and so she had also taken a few real estate classes, but she wasn't enjoying it, so she stopped doing that, and she pretty much was just doing the waitressing, and so that's kind of what her and Allie ended up doing. And I rented a car, and little Grant and I drove to North Carolina. We stayed with some friends at Grant's for about a week while we located a place to live. I really wanted to get a house so that the kids had a yard and stuff to play in, and he was like determined he wanted this apartment on Bella Park Trail. So we got that. I purchased a vehicle for us because living in New York, we didn't have a car. So I purchased a Saab SUV. I purchased furniture, just set up the whole house. I purchased bedroom furniture for the kids, for us, living room furniture, everything. I furnished the whole apartment.
At some point, did General also come to live with you and Grant and Little Grant?
He did. At this time, it's really kind of escalating. Grant and Laura are really just not communicating at all. Neither one of them are trusting each other. I know that there was some discussion about her giving Grant Gentle. I know, well, again, my information is coming from Grant, so Laura and I really didn't communicate. We didn't talk or anything. Grant had told me that Laura had spoke with one of the ladies that worked at the daycare center and asked her opinion, what she felt like, what she should do. And I know that at one point in time, and I learned this from Grant's father, Grant's father had encouraged Laura that, Grant was in a more stable position to be able to take care of the boys. Plus, the boys were mixed in that at some point in time, they were not going to be cute little mixed kids. They were going to be considered black men. And because Grant was black, that his dad told her that he felt like it was in their best interest to be able to have that in their life, to have that, just that influence.
Do you know, what was the arrangement between Grant and Laura as to when the children were with him and when they were with her?
Well, when we first came to North Carolina, there was no order. The courts were just barely involved in the situation. And so Grant had, little Grant and Laura had Gentle. There were no visitations. We had gone to Kinston several times and took little Grant to see Laura, plus so that Grant could see Gentle. And at that time, it was just really a lot of mistrusting between the two of them. And I know at one point in time we had gone and she had taken Gentle somewhere and she wouldn't let Grant see him. And based on some information that Grant's sister, Grantina, was telling him, he was able to get an ex parte order, and he received custody of Gentle in the middle of June.
And then both Little Grant and Gentle came to Raleigh to live with you?
That's correct. We picked Gentle up from the daycare center that afternoon. I remember being so nervous because honestly, I was really scared. I had never had two kids before. My sister Karen, she has two boys and I have Shay, and whenever they were little, when I would babysit all three of them, they would, I was about to go crazy. I mean, two kids, okay, but three, I was very stressed out, so I was very nervous. And whenever we got him, he just cried and cried, and Grant didn't appear to know how to really console him. And I kept telling him, because I was driving again, he didn't have a driver's license at this time. And so I ended up pulling over, and I got Gentle out of his car seat, and he just attached to me, and he did not let go at all. He was definitely very, very upset.
Well, how was the exchange? And Laura had the boys on the weekends, right?
That's correct, but not until a few weeks later. We had gone to court in Kinston, and that's when Grant and Laura and the attorneys kind of came to some agreements, which is what John Sargent spoke of whenever he testified.
That was the agreement by which Grant and Gentle would be with Grant during the weekdays.
Yes, sir.
Laura would have custody on the weekend.
Yes, sir. And I believe, in my opinion, that part of that reason was because Laura was kind of unstable at that time. She didn't have a job, and she had been staying with Grant's parents. And and plus Gentle had been very, very sick. And because we were trying to get the surgery done for him, the judge had agreed to let him stay in this environment until he could get healthy and get his surgery and stuff. And I believe that that's why the judge agreed to that at that time.
And how was the exchange with the children?
Well, at this time, Grant and Laura absolutely have no hardly civil conversations. They're both very mistrusting of each other, and they are emailing and text messaging all day, every day, all the time. Whenever the exchanges in Wilson, Grant and I usually went together. He told me that whenever he went by himself, that she, would taunt him or, call him names. At one point, whenever Gentle had his surgery, whenever she brought little Grant back that day, Grant had taken Gentle downstairs so that she could see him during the exchange, and Grant told me that she had cursed him out and that it made little Grant really upset, and so he didn't like to be around her by himself.
What was the relationship that you had with Laura?
Laura and I we really didn't have problems. Later on, I think that Grant, because he would get upset with me for being too nice to her, he would tell me that whenever I was nice to her, it made it seem like he was the problem, that they weren't able to get along, and whenever I could get along with her, it made it appear like he was the problem. And so he would really try to just keep us from communicating.
Tell us what happened between that period of time and the end of the year 2000.
Well,
2010.
okay, let's see, July, August. Okay, whenever we went to court, the court had ordered this custody evaluation involving Dr. Calloway. Laura started getting little Grant on the weekends and eventually getting Gentle. But when little Grant, when he did his first couple of visits, when he would come home, he was very upset. He would just cry, and he would baby talk, and he would throw himself in the floor. And we were generally very concerned about him. And so Grant had done some research on the computer, and he had found Dr. Wynn, who I believe is in Cary. And so we scheduled an appointment to try to help. My understanding, the reason we went to Dr. Wynn was to help little Grant with the transition. Whenever we got there, there was another doctor, I can't remember her name, but she pretty much saw the kids, and I went with the kids. So what Grant and Dr. Wynn spoke about, I wasn't present. I really don't know. I primarily stayed with the kids. Shay went a couple of times, and
Was the child custody evaluation going on?
it had not started yet. That was one reason we contacted Dr. Wynn, was because Dr. Calloway was taking so long to contact anybody to get started. And at one point, Mr. Hill had said that Mr. Sargent had gone out of town, and that was part of the postponement, was because Dr. Calloway had to meet or have a conference with the two attorneys, and because Mr. Sargent was not available at the time, that was the holdup. Eventually, they did schedule an appointment, and Laura and Grant met with Dr. Calloway. After that visit, Grant, whenever he came home, he told me that he felt like Dr. Calloway was kind of picking at him. At that time, Grant had gone to Los Angeles to record some music. He had an opportunity to do a couple songs with the band Earth, Wind, and Fire. And so he had gone there, and while he was gone, he had a second appointment, I believe, with Dr. Calloway, and he had tried to reschedule it through email, and Dr. Calloway never responded to his email, and so he had to come back early. And whenever he went to the office, he just told me that he felt like she was kind of taunting him. And I told him, due to some of the stuff that Laura had told Dr. Calloway, she may just be trying to see how he reacts whenever he gets upset. So, basically don't fall into her trap, just, remain calm or whatever. And
What period of time is the evaluation going on now?
I got pregnant with Lily in September, so it's probably September, October. It's probably around that time.
And between that time and the end of the year, what's happening with you financially?
Financially, by December, I am completely broke. He's not worked at all. Part of the accusations that Laura made was because he worked in clubs and stuff, that he wasn't, it wasn't an appropriate environment for the children. And so he really wasn't, he wasn't doing music at this time. And so really there was no money coming in whatsoever. At some point, he had talked me into giving him $50,000 to open a business account for a company, corporation he had started called Hayes Ltd. And pretty much he said that if I gave him $50,000, he could figure out how to make some money. And so he started doing some art stuff. He started working with this guy in New York. His name is Peter. I don't recall his last name. Honestly, I really don't know what all he did with the money. I know he bought computer software, music instruments.
Was the money gone by the end of 2010?
Yes, sir, it was completely.
Was Grant bringing in anything?
None at all. At the end of December, well, and another thing, like the court kept getting postponed, and at this point in time, we had already paid, or I had paid Dr. Calloway approximately $10,000 at this time. I had paid all the attorney fees at this time. And Dr. Calloway was wanting an additional $5,000, and honestly, we just did not have it at all. And so Grant told her he wasn't paying it, and then that's whenever they filed contempt of court on him. And he felt like Mr. Hill was not, why is this taking so long? And so he had a friend in Charlotte who had encouraged him to get an attorney in the same town. He said, because Mr. Hill was in a different town, that if he had an attorney from the same location, that it might be better for him. And so he met with Mr. Coley, and Mr. Coley told him he would represent him, but again, you have to pay a retainer, which was $5,000. So now we have no money. We need a new attorney. We still owe Calloway $5,000, so that's $10,000. So now he talks me into letting him pawn some of my jewelry. I had quite a bit of expensive jewelry, and I was very hesitant, but he assured me that as soon as this iPod cases came off, that he would get it back for me. I had a Rolex watch that Nikki had purchased for me, my wedding ring, engagement ring, and some other stuff, but primarily those were like really sentimental to me. And I told him I do not want to sell them, that is not my intention, but I would let him pawn it so that he could at least get the money to finish paying Dr. Calloway, because I didn't want him to go to jail, and because he kept telling me he was going to go to jail if he didn't pay this, and also so that he could get another attorney.
Now, we're up to, what, January 2011?
Yeah, about January. Also, I had a green diamond that Nikki had brought back from Brazil. I really don't know what its value was. It was a green yellow diamond. It had been tested to make sure it was authentic, but it had never been appraised. So Grant had tried to sell that here in North Carolina, but they only offered him $8,000 for it. And I just told him I didn't feel like I felt like it was worth way more than that. And so he said that he would go to New York and sell it. And while he was there, he told me he only got $5,000 for it.
Is that the money that he used to pay for the lawyer?
That and the money he used to pay, that he pawned my watch and my rings and stuff.
Were you also starting to live on credit cards at this time?
Yes, sir. At this time, I had put a lot of, actually maybe all of Dr. Calloway's stuff on my credit cards. And up until the time I met Grant, I've always had excellent credit. I always paid my bills ahead of time. I mean, this was really the first time in my life, other than when I was like 20, 21, that I had ever had any kind of financial instability.
What's going on after January 2011 with Laura and Grant?
Well, I'm becoming very, very depressed. I'm in a situation that I would have never thought. My daughter is, 21 years old, and I waited all this time to have another baby, 22 years, and now I'm in this situation. I have no money, and I'm not seeing it work it out with Grant and I'm trying to figure out how I can really get out of this situation, but I don't want to leave him in a bad situation either. There's no money left. I'm not in a position to be able to get a job. We only have one vehicle, so I'm really becoming very depressed and scared. Grant tells me that, he wants to go to Nashville to see if he can sell some of his songs. He has written a bunch of songs. So I scrape together what money I can, and he goes to Nashville for about a week. While he's in Nashville, I'm talking to him, and he's telling me everything is going great. Everyone's loving him, and then he gets back, and it was just, they didn't like him. He felt like they were just using him. He supposedly was working with this lady to write some songs, but just everything, whenever he started it, had all this big oomph, but he never finished anything. Nothing ever turned out into anything. It was just all talk, always. He went to New York several times. When I was about 8.5 months pregnant, by about May, he has a friend in Hawaii, and his friend kept telling him that he should come to Hawaii, that there was a lot of money there to be made. And so I used the very last of my frequent flyer miles to get him to Hawaii.
And you're back at home by yourself?
Yep, I have the 2 little boys, and I'm very, very pregnant with Lily, and I'm just really stressed out. And that's the time Shay came to the house that she spoke of, and she found me in the bathroom crying.
Why were you crying?
I was just so overwhelmed. I didn't know how to get out of this relationship. I loved the 2 little boys very, very much, and I didn't feel like Grant needed them if I wasn't there to take care of them, and I didn't feel like he knew how to take care of them. I just felt like I was in over my head. I was having a baby. I didn't want to be a single mom again. So I was really just scared.
What were you thinking at that point? What needed to be done as far as custody of the boys?
Well, at that time, I had gone into false labor, and Grant came back to North Carolina. And around that time, Dr. Calloway had submitted her report to the attorneys, and we went to Kinston and met with Mr. Coley. And he gave us a copy to read it, and we pretty much read like 2 pages, and Mr. Coley came back in and told us, why don't you take this home and read it, and we'll get back together. But he flipped to the end of it, and, we had a quick meeting in regards to what it said, what Dr. Calloway was recommending. And in my opinion, it was just totally ridiculous. I mean, we live in Kinston. I mean, we live in Raleigh, and Laura lives in Kinston. We already spend hours. I mean, she's wanting a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old to spend 12 hours a week in a car. And I just thought that it was the most ridiculous thing. And so at that point, I really felt like, something has got to give here. Just for myself, I mean, I'm financially exhausted, physically, mentally, just everything. And so whenever we left the attorney's office, I was driving, and Grant was in the passenger seat, and he read probably 2 or 3 pages, and he threw it on the dash, and he told me that it wasn't worth the paper it was written on, that it was bullshit, and that whenever we got home, he had done some research in regards to some of the testing, and he had found that, the testing was created like in the 1920s, that first of all, it wasn't geared toward minority people at all, which he was black, so that automatically made him a little unique. Then he was an entertainer, a very extrovert, so that made him a little more unique. And so he was just basically, he just felt like Calloway was against him from the get-go. Honestly, I did not ever read that report until Rosemary gave it to me to read approximately a year ago. So I was not familiar with what the report said until recently, actually. At this point, I was really encouraging Grant that maybe he should consider letting Laura have the boys. We were out of money, and we had already been late on the rent several times. My niece, Candace, had owed me some money, and while Grant was in Hawaii, she had sent me like $1,500, and I actually used that to pay the rent instead of what she really sent it to me for. I had actually pawned a few more pieces of my jewelry just to pay on my watch and stuff, so I didn't lose them. I mean, at this point, there's really nothing. I'm living completely on credit cards. Now I've gone to my American Express, which I've never used that card except for what I could pay on, because American Express is really a charge card, not a credit card. And so I had bought a couple of gift certificates at Target just to kind of be able to buy groceries and stuff. And I was just really encouraging Grant. He just really needed, because he had always felt like Laura, it was about money for her. And I told him that if that's what it was, that after a year she was going to give them back to him anyway. And so he had spoke to his parents about us moving to Kinston for a little while until his iPod stuff had come through. They were really just kind of waiting on the packaging. And so, so
Who was going to move to Kinston to live with the parents?
Grant and I and Lily. He had told his parents that it was just the 3 of us coming to stay with him. His parents, whenever I was pregnant with Lily, toward the end of it, they were running to retire from the daycare, and so they had offered us the daycare and to live in their house. And his dad was very, he said that it would be really good for us since we have little kids, and also it was something that we would be close to Laura and the boys, and so that we could all kind of try to have a relationship, everybody together. So
the boys would be with Laura in Kinston.
Yes, sir.
Grant and Lily would be with his parents in Kinston.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
All close together. When was Lily born?
She was born June 9th. She was 9 days late, and Grant had allowed Laura to have the boys for 2 weeks prior to her being born.
also received notice from your apartment complex that you were being evicted?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And was that one of the things that prompted you looking for a place to stay?
Yes, that's just everything. We had been talking about moving anyway, and he just kept waiting on this iPod stuff. Like that was really like every week. Like hopefully this is the week it's coming. It's coming, and he was anticipating getting about $50,000 or $60,000. So we were just kind of holding our breath, trying to hold off until that came through.
Now we're approaching July 13th.
Yes, sir. Whenever I was in the hospital with Lily, Grant and Laura were fighting all day this one day, and I told him one day because whenever Lily was born, she was born on a Thursday, and his parents were coming on Friday to see her, and I had asked Grant to ask Laura if his parents could bring the boys so that they could meet Lily. Little Grant was especially excited about Lily. And anyway, they had fought all day, and it was that night she told him no, that the boys weren't coming, that it was her weekend. And he just got upset because she had already had them for 2 weeks, and now the baby's here. And anyway, and I told him that night, I was like, you know what, you've missed everything because you've been so busy fighting that you've just missed the pregnancy, you've missed everything. And he just closed the computer and left. He didn't even say anything else to me. And the next day she ended up bringing the boys, well, Sunday she brought the boy, Saturday, I'm sorry, and he met her downstairs and got the boys back.
And was that when the boys met Lily?
Yeah, they came up and they got to spend the day with her.
All right, it's 10 after 1. I think we'll stop for the lunch break. You haven't heard it all. Keep an open mind. Don't formally express any opinion about any matter in controversy. Be careful about your conduct. Leave your notes in your chair. Come back in about an hour, about 2:15, please.